I'll never forget the night I stood outside apartment 3B and heard someone breathing on the other side of the door. The apartment that had been empty for months. The apartment that, according to my landlord, no one had the keys to, but someone or something was inside.
This happened to me about 3 years ago when I was living alone in a small apartment complex in the older part of town. I had just graduated and gotten my first job, so I was excited to finally have my own place. The rent was cheap, the landlord seemed decent, and most importantly, it was quiet. Or at least, I thought it was. The building had 3 floors, and I lived on the second floor in apartment 2B. There were only 2 apartments per floor, and mine faced the back alley. The apartment directly above me, 3B, had been empty for the 2 months I'd been living there. I actually liked it that way. No footsteps, no furniture scraping, no noise at all. Everything changed one Thursday night in October.
I was working late on my laptop when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the apartment above. I figured someone had finally moved in. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I noticed something odd. The footsteps would start around 11 p.m., always at the same time, and they would just pace back and forth from one end of the apartment to the other, over and over again for about 20 minutes, then nothing. The next night, same thing. 11 p.m., the pacing started. I tried to ignore it, put on headphones, whatever, but it was consistent enough that I started noticing the pattern. 20 minutes of pacing, then silence for the rest of the night. About a week into this, I ran into my landlord in the lobby. I casually asked him about the new tenant upstairs. He looked at me confused and said, "What new tenant? 3B is still vacant, has been for months." I felt my stomach drop. I told him about the footsteps. He frowned and said he'd check it out, but he seemed skeptical, like maybe I was hearing things from another apartment. That night, I decided to stay up and wait. At exactly 10:55 p.m., I turned off all my lights and stood in my living room, directly under where the pacing usually happened. My phone was in my hand, ready to record any sound. 11 p.m. hit. Nothing. I waited. 11:05, still nothing. I started to feel stupid, like maybe my landlord was right and I had been hearing sounds from somewhere else. Then, at 11:07, it started. But this time, it was different. The footsteps were slower, heavier, and they stopped right above where I was standing. I held my breath. My apartment was completely silent except for my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. It moved from above my living room toward what would be the bedroom area upstairs. Then the footsteps followed, slow and deliberate. I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I went upstairs. The hallway on the 3rd floor was dimly lit by a single bulb. I stood in front of apartment 3B. The door was old, painted dark green, with a small peephole. I leaned close and listened. Silence. I knocked, softly at first, then a bit louder. "Hello? Is someone in there?" Nothing. I tried the doorknob. Locked, obviously. I put my ear against the door, and that's when I heard it. Breathing. Heavy, raspy breathing right on the other side of the door. I stepped back so fast I almost tripped. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone to call my landlord, but then the breathing stopped. I stood there for what felt like forever, just staring at that door. Finally, I went back downstairs and locked every lock on my door. The next morning, my landlord came by with keys. We went up to 3B together. He opened the door and we walked in. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no belongings, nothing. Just dusty floors and bare walls. The landlord checked every room, every closet. Nothing. But here's the thing that still bothers me. In the bedroom, on the dusty floor, there were marks. drag marks like something heavy had been pulled across the floor recently, and footprints, just one set, pacing back and forth, exactly where I'd been hearing them. My landlord didn't have an explanation. He changed the locks on 3B and told me to let him know if I heard anything else. I heard the footsteps twice more after that, both times at 11 p.m., both times the same pattern. But I never went back upstairs. I moved out 2 months later. Last I heard, apartment 3B still sits empty. The landlord told me he's had trouble renting it. People tour it during the day and say they'll think about it, but they never call back. I drove past that building last week, late at night, around 11 p.m. I looked up at the third-floor windows. The lights were off in 3B, like always, but I swear I saw a shadow moving behind the curtains that shouldn't have been there.